The first insult came so casually it might have been mistaken for a joke, except no one laughed. Instead, silence thickened the courtroom like smoke, choking the air, daring anyone to breathe. The white lawyer, Thomas Hale, leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension as he looked at the teenage boy seated before him. "You people," he said, pausing just enough to savor the weight of the words. "Always end up here, don't you? Different faces, same story. Trouble seems to follow your kind like a shadow." His smirk spread across his face as though he had just delivered a line of profound wisdom. But his eyes betrayed something uglier in eagerness to crush, to belittle, to remind everyone who still held power. The boy, Marcus, clenched his jaw. At 17, his life had already been reduced to a caricature in the eyes of men like Hale. Another black kid with potential for violence, another statistic waiting to be filed. But Marcus didn't drop his gaze. His eyes burned not with tears, but with the kind of quiet defiance that unnerves men who thrive on submission. Hale noticed, and it infuriated him. "Answer me, boy." Hale pressed, his tone sharp now, laced with venom. "Where were you the night of the break-in? Don't stall. Don't play innocent. We both know why you're here." Marcus's lips parted, but before he could speak, his public defender and overworked attorney drowning in cases placed a hand on his arm, signaling him to stay silent. The gallery rustled with whispers. Parents pulled children closer. Others shook their heads as though the boy's fate was already sealed. The judge presiding leaned back, unimpressed but not intervening. In the second row, unnoticed by Hale, a woman sat with hands folded tightly on her lap. Her eyes sharp, intelligent, furious never left the lawyer. Her composure was flawless, but beneath it roared an anger no one could yet comprehend. She was Evelyn Carter, a federal judge known for her unflinching rulings and commitment to justice. She was also Marcus's mother. Hale, in his arrogance, hadn't bothered to learn who filled the courtroom that day. If he had, perhaps he would have noticed the golden sunlight catching the edges of Evelyn's dark hair, the way her presence seemed to command the very air around her. But Hale saw only what he wanted, a scared black teenager, an easy win, a notch on his belt to advance his career. "Your Honor," Hale said smugly, turning back to the bench, "I think we all understand the kind of young man we're dealing with. The prosecution will show that Marcus Carter fits a predictable, tragic pattern that has plagued this city for decades." His words landed like blows. A few nods from the gallery betrayed agreement, but more faces turned uneasy, sensing the malice behind his rhetoric. Marcus's mother remained still, her lips pressed together, her fury disguised as patience. Hale had no idea he was speaking not only to the court, but into the heart of the storm about to engulf him. Marcus shifted in his seat, his hands tightening on the wooden edge of the defendant's table. The sun caught the sheen of sweat on his brow, making him look both fragile and unbreakable. The silence that followed Hale's words was heavy until Marcus finally spoke. "I didn't do it," he said softly, each word deliberate, steady. "I didn't break into that store." His voice cracked, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing that truth alone might not be enough. Hale scoffed, shaking his head like a teacher disappointed in a student. "They all say that," he muttered, not caring that everyone heard. The courtroom tensed. It wasn't just what he said, it was the casual cruelty of it, the reduction of Marcus's humanity into a lazy stereotype. Somewhere deep inside, Evelyn Carter's resolve sharpened to steel. She knew there was a line between what could be tolerated and what demanded reckoning. Hale had just crossed it. Marcus's words lingered in the still air like fragile glass, threatening to shatter at the faintest touch. He had said it clearly, simply, "I didn't do it." But in a courtroom where his skin spoke louder than his voice, truth was already on trial. Thomas Hale chuckled, low and dismissive, leaning one hand on the polished oak podium. "Of course you didn't," he said with sarcasm so thick it nearly dripped. "Just like the others before you. Always innocent. Always misunderstood. Yet, somehow, always guilty in the end. Curious, isn't it?" A ripple of discomfort spread through the gallery. Some people looked away, others exchanged glances heavy with judgment. But there were a few teachers, neighbors, strangers who felt their stomachs twist with unease. They weren't sure if Marcus was guilty, but they recognized cruelty when they heard it. Marcus's attorney shifted uncomfortably beside him, clearly outmatched. He was a man juggling dozens of cases, paid barely enough to breathe, and Hale knew it. Hale preyed on weakness, on exhaustion, on the imbalance of power, and he thrived. Let me remind the court, Hale continued, now pacing with theatrical flair, that young Marcus here was found near the scene. Put up, late at night, with no clear explanation. Do we really need to stretch our imagination to fill in the blanks? He let the words hang, inviting assumptions to bloom like weeds. The jurors shifted, some nodding slightly, others frowning as though still undecided. Evelyn Carter's fingers curled tighter against her lap, her nails pressing crescents into her skin. Her face betrayed nothing, but inside, the fire grew hotter. She had watched this pattern unfold in countless courtrooms, the narrative painted before evidence, the stereotypes weaponized before facts. But this time it was her son on the receiving end. This time the fire was personal. Marcus inhaled deeply, his chest rising and falling as though the weight of the world pressed down on it. He wanted to scream, to fight, to make them see him for who he was and not who Hale insisted he must be. But his mother's lessons whispered in his memory, hold steady. Truth stands taller when spoken calmly. So he sat, quiet yet unyielding, his dark eyes never leaving Hale's face. Hale caught the boy's stare and sneered. What's with that look? Think you're better than me? That's the problem with your generation. No respect. No accountability. He turned toward the jury, spreading his arms as though presenting undeniable evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll see the prosecution has no doubt. Marcus Carter is guilty of the burglary that rattled this community. And not just guilty, predictably guilty. Because when opportunity meets temptation in neighborhoods like his, well, the outcome is never in doubt. The words sliced through the air like knives. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then a cough, a whisper, the shuffle of shoes. The judge cleared his throat, but didn't reprimand Hale. Perhaps he thought it best to let the performance run its course. Perhaps he agreed. Evelyn Carter's breath grew sharper. To sit silently, while venom like that filled the air, felt unbearable. But she reminded herself, timing mattered. Justice demanded precision. She had wielded her gavel in federal courtrooms, silencing arrogance with a single strike. But here, in this moment, she was a mother cloaked in the skin of an observer. Not yet revealed, not yet unleashed. Hale strutted back to his table, satisfied with the spectacle. He looked at Marcus like one might look at a cornered animal. Marcus's chest ached with the effort of holding his composure. His knuckles whitened on the table. He wanted to yell, "I'm not what you say I am. I am not your stereotype. I am not your shadow." But his lawyer whispered, "Stay calm. We'll get our chance." So Marcus swallowed the words, burying them like burning coals in his throat. The trial pressed on. Witnesses spoke, some with shaky voices, others with certainty built on assumption. A store owner claimed he saw someone who looked like Marcus fleeing the scene, though under questioning he admitted the night was dark, the figure hooded, and his own vision poor. Another neighbor testified about troublemakers in Marcus's neighborhood, painting a broad brush that had nothing to do with the boy sitting at the table. Each statement felt like bricks stacked against Marcus, building a wall designed to trap him inside. And through it all, Hale smiled. When cross-examination came, Marcus's lawyer did his best, poking holes, pressing gently, but his fatigue showed. He lacked the fire, the hunger to dismantle Hale's narrative. And Hale knew it. The afternoon sun slid across the courtroom, its golden light softening the hard edges of wood and stone. It fell on Marcus's face, illuminating the determination etched into his young features. It fell on Evelyn's hair, catching threads of silver like a crown. And it fell on Hale, too, though he was blind to it, too drunk on his own certainty to notice the storm gathering. After a recess, the court reconvened. Hale rose once more, striding to the center. He eyed Marcus with cold amusement. "You know," he said, "I can't help but think about the mothers in this community. The good mothers. The ones who teach their sons respect, discipline, responsibility. And I wonder, where was your mother, Marcus? Where was she when you were out there, sneaking around, making choices that brought you here today?" The words detonated like a bomb. Gasps rippled across the gallery. Marcus's face drained of color, his lips tightening as if nailed shut. His mother's hands, folded so tightly they shook, nearly betrayed her composure. Evelyn Carter had endured insult before. She had seen prejudice paraded in polished words. But to hear a stranger, this arrogant man, question her motherhood in front of her son, in front of a jury, in front of a community, was more than insult. It was war. For the first time that day, Evelyn leaned forward. Just slightly. But enough that the light caught her eyes, enough that a few in the gallery noticed. Hale didn't. He was too busy basking in his cruelty. Boys like Marcus, Hale continued, don't end up here by accident. They end up here because of failures at home. Because their families didn't guide them. Because no one taught them better. He turned back toward Marcus, his voice lowering, dripping venom. Tell me, boy, did your mother teach you to steal? The courtroom erupted in murmurs, outrage mixing with shock. The judge banged his gavel for order, but the echoes of Hale's question reverberated louder than wood on wood. Marcus stared at him, stunned. The boy's chest heaved, his heart pounding with the sting of an insult too vile to ignore. And in the gallery, Evelyn Carter rose slowly to her feet. Evelyn Carter's rise was almost imperceptible at first, just a quiet motion among the shifting bodies of the gallery. But when she stood at her full height, the air in the courtroom shifted. Conversations stilled, whispers cut short, and eyes turned toward her as if the golden sunlight itself had chosen to illuminate only her. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Authority clung to her like a second skin, the kind that can't be rehearsed or faked. Even the judge at the bench paused, eyebrows arched as though sensing something powerful he had overlooked. Hale noticed her then, finally. He tilted his head, smirking, assuming she was another outraged relative, another emotional mother ready to burst into tears. He welcomed it. Nothing elevated his performance more than the presence of a distraught family member to contrast his calm, reasonable demeanor. Ma'am, the judge warned, voice firm. Sit down. This is a courtroom, not a stage. Evelyn's eyes shifted to him, and for a fleeting second the bench felt smaller, the robe less commanding. Her gaze carried a weight he couldn't quite place, but enough to silence him. She turned back to Hale. Her voice was steady, every syllable honed like a blade. You just asked my son, she said, if his mother taught him to steal. The words dropped into the silence like thunder. Gasps erupted. A few people covered their mouths. Marcus froze, eyes wide, his body rigid with disbelief. Hale blinked, then scoffed. Your son. He chuckled, shaking his head as if dismissing her. Ma'am, I understand but Evelyn raised a hand, silencing him with nothing more than the gesture. You've paraded stereotypes. You've slandered his character. You've demeaned his community. And now, without knowing who sits before you, you dared question his mother's integrity. She stepped forward, her heels echoing against the marble floor. Each strike carried the sound of inevitability. Hale tried to recover, his smile faltering. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Evelyn cut him off, her tone sharp but calm. What's irregular, Mr. Hale? Is a prosecutor turning a courtroom into a stage for prejudice. What's irregular is reducing a child to the color of his skin rather than the content of the evidence. What's irregular is the arrogance of a man who assumes he can speak unchecked, without consequence. The judge attempted to interject, but Evelyn's words rose above him, carried by a voice accustomed to commanding attention. For the record, she said, her eyes sweeping across the room. I am Judge Evelyn Carter of the United States District Court. And you, Mr. Hale, have not only disrespected this courtroom, you have disrespected the very principles you swore to uphold. Silence thundered louder than applause. Hale's mouth opened, then shut, then opened again. His face flushed crimson, his posture collapsing in on itself. The jury stared, some wide-eyed, some with newfound clarity. They weren't just watching a trial anymore. They were witnessing a reckoning. Marcus sat frozen, his chest rising with shallow breaths, his eyes darting from his mother to Hale. Pride welled in him like a tide he could barely contain. All his life, she had been his anchor, his example, his reminder that dignity could survive even the harshest storms. But to see her now, revealing her power not as a whisper but as a roar, it was overwhelming. Evelyn wasn't finished. You questioned where his mother was, she continued, her voice softer now, but razor-sharp. I'll tell you where I was. I was working 16-hour days ensuring justice was served in federal courts across this country. I was mentoring young clerks, signing rulings that shaped lives, and fighting to make sure this nation lived up to its promise. And all the while, I was raising my son to believe in fairness, in truth, in respect. The very values you seem to have forgotten. Hale sputtered, searching for footing. Your Honor, Judge Carter, I didn't realize— No, Evelyn interrupted. You didn't. Because you didn't care to. You saw a young black boy and assumed his story before he opened his mouth. That's not law, Mr. Hale. That's bigotry dressed in a suit. Murmurs swelled in the gallery, no longer whispers of discomfort, but waves of agreement, voices emboldened by her courage. The judge at the bench finally leaned forward, clearing his throat, his gavel trembling slightly in his hand. Judge Carter, he said cautiously, with all due respect, you are not presiding here. Evelyn turned her gaze to him, calm and commanding. With all due respect, I am not here as a judge on the bench. I am here as the mother of a boy unjustly slandered. But let me remind you, justice is not confined to who holds the gavel. Justice is the duty of every person in this room, including you. The judge swallowed, his jaw tightening. He knew she was right, and worse, he knew the room knew it too. Hale shifted uncomfortably, his once proud posture deflated. He glanced at the jury, but their eyes were no longer on him. They were on Evelyn, on Marcus, on the golden truth pouring into the room like sunlight through cracks in a wall. Marcus's lawyer, emboldened by the shift, finally rose. Your Honor, he said firmly to the presiding judge, given the prosecutor's conduct his racially charged statements, his personal attack on the defendant and his family, I move for a mistrial. Hale whipped his head around, panic creeping into his features. That's absurd, he barked. I was merely exposing your prejudice. Evelyn cut in. Her voice was quiet now, but deadly. This court deserves better. This community deserves better. And my son deserves better. For the first time that day, Thomas Hale had no words. The courtroom, bathed in gold, held its breath. Marcus stared at his mother, his chest heavy with awe. She wasn't just defending him, she was defending every child who had ever sat in that chair, every life reduced by arrogance and assumptions. In that moment, he saw her not just as his mother, not just as a judge, but as something greater, a guardian of dignity itself. The courtroom remained suspended in that golden hush, a silence so thick it pressed against the chest of every person present. The presiding judge stared down from the bench, his gavel hovering midair as if striking it would shatter something fragile, yet monumental. His eyes darted between Evelyn Carter, the mother who had revealed herself not just as kin, but as a federal judge, and Thomas Hale, the once confident prosecutor who now sat pale and sweating, his arrogance leaking out of him like air from a punctured balloon. Marcus sat still, but the energy inside him surged like a storm. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt the scales tipping, not completely, not yet, but enough to breathe. His mother's words still echoed in him, filling cracks Hale's insults had carved. She hadn't just defended him. She had exposed the rot that had stalked him his entire life. The judge finally set the gavel down, folding his hands, trying to reclaim the authority Evelyn's presence had swallowed whole. The motion for mistrial will be considered, he said, his tone stiff. But before I make that determination, I need both counsels to step forward. Hale lurched up, still trying to recover his balance, while Marcus's lawyer, emboldened now, walked with newfound resolve. Evelyn returned to her seat, her hand brushing briefly against Marcus's Shadera silent promise, a tether that steadied him. Mr. Hale, the judge began, the accusations raised here are serious. Do you deny that your statements carried racial prejudice? Hale's jaw twitched. Your Honor, I was simply pointing out facts, drawing on patterns, the judge cut in sharply, or assumptions based on race. Hale stammered, eyes darting toward the jury. He saw no allies there now, only skeptical, even condemning stares. The performance that once had them nodding now reeked of malice. I may have chosen my words poorly, he muttered, his voice shrinking. Evelyn's gaze never left him. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her silence weighed heavier than any argument. The judge leaned back, exhaling through his nose. Given the nature of the prosecutor's comments and the damage done to the impartiality of these proceedings, this court has no choice but to declare a mistrial. The gavel struck at last, echoing like thunder. The gallery erupted, some with cheers, others with gasps of disbelief. Marcus's chest heaved, relief flooding through him. though tempered by the knowledge that freedom wasn't yet secured. Another trial could follow, but the poison Hale had tried to inject into this one had been burned out under the light of truth. Hale stood frozen, his career unraveling in real time. His arrogance, once his armor, now hung around him like chains. The presiding judge turned to him. Furthermore, this court recommends a review of your conduct by the State Bar. Your words today violated not only the dignity of this courtroom, but the very ethics of your office. Hale opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. He sat heavily, staring at the floor as though it might open and swallow him whole. Marcus's lawyer squeezed his client's shoulder. "We'll fight this, Marcus," he whispered. "The truth is with us now." But Marcus barely heard. His eyes were on his mother, who rose again, not with fire this time, but with grace. She stepped forward, her voice softer but resonant. "Justice is not about winning or losing," she said to the room, though her eyes lingered on Marcus. "It's about truth. It's about dignity. And it's about refusing to let prejudice write the story of our children before they've had a chance to live it." The gallery stilled once more, her words sinking into hearts like seeds. Some would resist them, some would deny them, but many others would carry them home. Marcus felt tears threaten at the edges of his eyes, but he held them back, not from shame, but from pride. His mother had shown him that strength was not the absence of pain, but the refusal to bow to it. The trial dissolved into motions, formalities, the bureaucratic grind of justice. But for Marcus, the real verdict had already been delivered. He was not what Hale called him. He was not the shadow of someone else's prejudice. He was Marcus Carter, son of Judge Evelyn Carter, and no man could take that truth from him. When the court adjourned, the golden light had softened into dusk. People filed out, murmuring, some offering quiet nods of respect to Evelyn, others avoiding her eyes, unsure how to reconcile what they had witnessed. Hale slipped out a side door, shoulders hunched, his once polished image now a cautionary tale. Marcus walked beside his mother, the weight of chains invisible, but still heavy, the weight of a system that had almost devoured him. Yet he also carried something else now, the sight of his mother standing unshaken against injustice, the knowledge that he was not alone in this fight. Outside the courthouse, the air was cool, touched with the scent of rain. Evelyn stopped, turning to face her son. For the first time that day, her composure softened, and her hand cupped his cheek. "You were brave," she whispered. "Braver than you know." Marcus swallowed hard, his voice breaking. I thought they were going to take everything." Evelyn shook her head gently. "They can try, but they can't take who you are. Never forget that." He nodded, tears finally slipping free, but this time he didn't hide them. They stood together on the courthouse steps, the last rays of sunlight painting them in gold. People passed by, some slowing, some watching, but in that moment it was only the mother and son, bound not just by blood but by a shared defiance that no prejudice could erase. The fight was not over. There would be another trial, another battle. But Hale's downfall was more than personal victory. It was proof that silence could be broken, that truth could pierce even the darkest prejudice, that dignity could outshine contempt. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus understood the lesson his mother had given him, not just in words, but in action. Justice may bend under the weight of arrogance, but it does not break when courage stands against it. The world would still test him, still judge him by the color of his skin before the content of his soul. But now, he carried with him the memory of this day, the day his mother stood and turned a courtroom of shadows into a hall of light. And with that memory, he walked into the uncertain night not as a victim, but as a survivor, a fighter, and a son who knew his worth. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.